POA and the Community Agreement Party BOT candidate town hall Zoom. We're excited you joined us this evening, and we look forward to an engaging hour. My name is Ed Finneran, and I'm here in Garden City with hopefully the rest of you and Rich Catalano. We will be your MCs for tonight's call. I'm joined tonight, in addition to Rich, by Judy Foxen, Courtney, who's running from the Eastern POA, Mike Dobb, running from the Estates POA, and Tracy Williams, running from Central. We have 3 ground rules, folks. Very simple. All questions that you'd like us to put in front of the candidates must be written out on your chat function. That's crucial. Number 2, make sure you're muted the entire time that we're on the call. And 3, we ask that your questions be short and sweet so that we can get as many questions in front of the candidates as possible. So with that, why don't we get started? And I'll turn it over to Judy first. Judy, please take a moment to introduce yourself and share a short bio with the audience.
Great, thanks, Ed. And thanks to everybody who joined. I know this week is kind of crazy with schools out and vacations and all, so we appreciate everybody taking a few minutes with us. So as Ed said, my name is Judy Courtney. Foxen is my maiden name, which I actually was a long time ago, but still use that sometimes. And a little bit about me, and I'll talk a little bit about me professionally, and then also kind of my history of service with the government and why I'm interested in the Board of Trustees position. So I did grow up in the Village. I've been very lucky to be able to say that, and had a great experience here, as I also raised my daughter here. So as I said, feel really lucky. I think this is a very unique place with a lot to offer and a lot of opportunity for us ahead in terms of change and what the future holds for the Village. From a professional perspective, I'm a human resources executive. So I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for a media sales organization located in New York City. And a great part of the work that I do is really related to working with leaders, working with teams and different groups of people around what are the problems that they're experiencing and how can they be most effective. So how can they solve their problems? How can I coach them to improve performance? How can we look at teams and processes and how they work? And what are some ways in which I can help people be their most successful selves? I share that with you because I think that's a skill I can bring to my role as a trustee. We have many departments, we have many different vendors, et cetera, that we work with. And the degree to which we can all work as one and make sure that we are all successful together is a key component for driving the Village forward. Finally, just a few minutes on my experience in the Village. I've been involved in the Eastern Property Owners Association and other Village governance activities for a number of years. So as I said, I've been in the EPOA and as a director, a vice president, and the president, where I was very instrumental in ensuring that we had a greater degree of engagement of all the Eastern residents and changed many of our bylaws to make sure that that happened. In addition, I've been on several other committees, the traffic committee, newsletter. I was instrumental in the 100-year anniversary committee for the community agreement, which was a great celebration we had at St. Paul's just a couple of years ago. And currently I serve on the Recreation and Cultural Affairs Committee as the at-large member. So I share that with you because I think it gives me a good perspective on how the Village operates, as well as some things can be improved as we move forward. So I really believe that the experience I have, as well as a vision towards the future, would help me be a successful trustee. Thanks, Ed. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Perfect.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks for everybody who decided to join us this evening. My name is Michael Dobb. I live at 33 Houston Road. I am the Estates POA candidate. I live with my wife. We have 3 children who are in the Garden City School District. 2 are in the middle school. 1 is at Stratford. Professionally, I am an attorney and have been for the last 24 plus years. I practice exclusively in divorce and family law areas. I have an office right here in Garden City at the 666 building, and I've been here. Now this will be my 3rd firm that I've been in this building and been practicing in this area. In addition to litigating cases, I'm also a trained mediator, so I do mediate conflict and actually approach all of my litigated cases with the same mindset of seeing what could be done to resolve the issues and come to consensus rather than litigating and bringing something through court if it could be avoided. I think that was probably the number one skill set that I thought of when I decided to run for trustee. I think it's something that's important, not only with dealing with fellow trustees, and whether it's Tracy, who's sitting across the table from me, or some of the FABGC members. We're all residents here, and I think it's important that we get along, number one, and that we work together to resolve the issues as opposed to fighting, like we seem to be doing outside of the board right now as part of this campaign. Outside of my professional experiences, I've been a member of the the Estates POA for many years now. I've served on its nominating committee. I'm currently a director as well, and also the secretary. Through that experience, that's how I learned about the community agreement. That's how I learned about the process that trustees coming through the POA go through. That's where I learned to respect it and saw how it worked and how it worked for many, many years. And hopefully I'll speak about that later in connection with some other questions. But generally, that's my background. That's my approach to becoming trustee. And that's some of the reasons why I decided to run. Tracy?
Great. Again, like everyone has said, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to be here and have us have an opportunity to meet with you and introduce ourselves. My name is Tracy Williams, and I am the candidate for the Central section. I have lived in Garden City most of my life. I've actually lived in the Estates and the East and now in the Central. So I have a diverse experience of how wonderful this village is. And I'm raising my child here. So I have a middle schooler in the Garden City public school system. I have always admired, what our community represents. And now that she's a little bit older, I have the opportunity to actually get more involved. So I felt like this was a great time for me to be able to step up and be a support to our community and give back the way that Garden City, I feel, has always given to me and to others. My background or my skill set, I've actually been in pharmaceutical sales for over 20 years. And in the past 17 years, have always worked in the critical care space. So in hospitals, working in critical care, you're dealing with the very sickest of patients. And oftentimes it's much more of a customer service partnership. So one of the kind of things that has been my mantra in my professional life is really asking that question of what keeps you up at night and trying to find solutions around that question, around, what are the bigger concerns? And how can we meet in the middle? How can we find resolutions? And because that's so much a part of what I do on the day-to-day, I think that that's a talent and a skill set that I can bring to the office of trustee to be able to hear all voices within the community, hear what's keeping us all up at night, and try and be a fair and neutral representative of the community and our needs.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tracy. So we'll jump right into questions. And Judy, I've got a couple prepared as we're starting to build our list from the chat room. Judy, can you share with us what you think are the three most critical issues facing the village today?
Sure. And, it's funny, as I was thinking about this, and I think this happens to many boards, what we think are the most critical issues today, a year from now, that list could be very different. So I think part of what I would include in my answer is that the ability to be flexible and respond as things emerge and change is probably as important as what the list says today. But if I were to answer kind of what I think it is for today, I would say three things. And I would assume not a lot of surprise as we talk through this. And I just want to add that in the East, we just did through the EPOA a survey of all of our Eastern residents to ask them what they thought the most important issues were facing them. We got hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of responses back, and use that to sort of channel for us what we believe are the most important issues as well. But the top three, I would say, have to do with water and water management, and a lot of the conversation that's been happening there, not only about lead, but also some other ways in which we manage that as a resource. I think that's one critical piece that we would all have to focus on. Secondly, I think, and this I believe was the number one issue in the EPOA survey, is traffic and safety, especially related to speeding. And how can we manage that more effectively as a village? And what are some things that we can put in place to make people feel like it is being addressed on a proactive way? And thirdly, and this comes and goes, quite frankly, with different boards, but I do think the St. Paul's issue and how we are going to resolve that will be a key issue for this board going forward. So those I would say are the three, but I think there's probably others that I would put on that list. I don't know if Mike or Tracy have anything to add there.
Yeah, Ed, if it's okay, I agree with everything that Judy said. That's part of our platform for sure. I don't think anybody would deny that those are, some of the major issues that Garden City's facing. But in addition to that, I would say, and one thing that we speak about, the three of us, is trying to keep politics out of our village and trying to assure that we can continue to maintain equal representation of trustees across all four sections of town. And no, this is a hallmark of the community agreement. We've been a one-party system for this long because it's worked. There's been no conflict. And with the advent last year of FABGC, a 527 political party, we've seen the opposite, I think, of what was intended by the community agreement. We now have negative campaigning. There's divisiveness within the village that we now have two factions, us and them, battling against each other in the newspapers, on social media. We see that there may be open disdain by the mayor for the POAs. So what's happened? I don't think anyone would want the village to be divided between red and blue politics and to have the divisiveness that comes with it. I think we all want the same thing. We all want clean water. We all want to make sure that there's safety with respect to traffic and our services. But I think with this election, what makes it really important is that a vote for FABGC candidates will essentially entrench a political party in a position of total power and assure that that's the case for future years, and assure that we're going to have battles between residents, you, me against you, for the upcoming elections. So this is a real important issue because there's a very real possibility that the way the voting goes with this new system that we're now working under, you may have one of our sections that's left with one trustee at the end of this election, and perhaps next year or the year after, they have no trustees representing their particular section. So for me, and I think for Tracy, and I think Judy would say the same thing, that's also one of the major issues that we feel it comes into play for this election.
Good, quickly.
Absolutely. Yes,
Go ahead.
and I concur completely. One of the things that I think we also talked about in terms of a big issue for Garden City is how we move forward as a community. And in talking about how that could actually be represented, we have put forward the idea of forming a committee, a Garden City 2040 committee. And that's really to honor the heritage of A.T. Stewart and Garden City being one of the first planned communities in the nation, to honor that heritage, but also have a long-term strategic plan for how we evolve as a community. And that's for infrastructure needs, but also for how we work with our business community, how we keep a thriving downtown center, and how the look and feel of Garden City should be maintained moving forward. So I think that when we look at our village and how wonderful it is, we love that about us, but we want it to continue. And we want to see how we can work together as a total team, no matter who sits on the board of trustees, but as a total team to really bring the community back together and start a vision for how we can evolve so that all of our kids want to come back and live here when they're grown up, just like I did, just like, we all hope that our children will. So I think that that's something that we will all feel very strongly about for the opportunity right now to bring everybody together and plan for the future.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks and Mike and Judy. You did mention St. Paul's, and coincidentally yesterday there was a village report that was issued on their website about a site visit and what the condition of the building is. And there was a lot of graphic pictures, I would say, that was posted on both the village website as well as Facebook. Could you go into a little bit more detail as far as what your vision is for St. Paul's and how you would tackle it as a trustee? I'll throw to Judy first, but sure.
Oh, okay, great. St. Paul's, right? The never ending question. I feel like when your kids were little, they had the song that never ends. It sort of feels like that a little bit. So I think there's a few things to really think through in terms of St. Paul's. And, I'll say as an aside, never mind, I'll leave that. So I think there's a few things, right? So one is that we've had many mayor committees and they have been made of great talented residents over the years who have really struggled with trying to figure out what to do. We've had at least 4, probably more than that. Several members of the current mayor's committee actually have been on previous committees and spent, literally years of their lives trying to come up with some solutions. So I admire the mayor for putting a committee together at this point. I hope that this committee can find a different answer than the others were, or that we as a village at least can come together around what a possible answer is. So one piece is I think we have to respect and listen to what the committee comes up with. So that's one piece. I do, I struggle a little bit that the 10 months went by before a committee was appointed, if this was, such a high priority, which I think most people agree that it is. So it's been a long time waiting. And during these 10 months, this board stopped the stabilization work that had been going on. So while things were not in good shape, so I do not want to pretend that they were in good shape at all, before there was stabilization work going on, I think it's unfortunate that that had stopped. And I don't know that there's a plan to continue that or not. There may be, but I'm not aware of it. In terms of, my view for St. Paul's, I believe I'm going to wait, quite frankly, and see what this committee comes up with, and then see what the options are. I think the options have to be well thought out, which I have every confidence, knowing the members of this committee, they will be. I think they have to be costed out, and I think they have to be true choices. So I believe that we should have a choice for, if we preserve the building, what would that be and what would that cost? If we demolish the building, what would that cost and what would go in its place? I think that third piece is a really important part of the choice, because people will have a very different read on, I may be willing to fund a recreation center that's brand new, that cost me $40 million, but I'm not willing to fund a recreation center in the old building that cost me $100 million. So all those things have to be thought through, and I hope and I'm confident that the committee will do that. But so that's one piece. The other piece is in terms of the referendum, which I know went back and forth with the last board, right? There were a lot of questions about that. I would be totally in favor of a referendum that is designed professionally. So the questions are clear, they're concise, and we get some true data from them. So it really drives us in a direction of making a choice.
Judy.
Great.
Thank you, Judy, very much. Guys, I'm just going to run into the next question. I'm not going to ask Tracy and Mike to comment. Mike, this one's for you. For residents who haven't been following the campaign for village election in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, without going into the individual candidates, can you let us know the differences and similarities between the slate of CAP candidates and the slate of FABGC candidates?
And before you answer the question, Mike, I just want to remind everybody who joined later that we do like you to put your questions into the chat feature. That's just write them in there and we'll make sure we get them to the candidates.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
So in a nutshell, the similarities are we're all residents, and Judy spoke about the critical issues that the village is facing now. I would bet that we're all on the same page. We want water quality. We're all worried about lead in our water, and something has to be done with it. We all want something to be done with St. Paul's. Traffic, we all are cognizant of speeding issues. So in that respect, we're all on the same page. We're all residents. I think we all want what's best for Garden City. The differences are more related to what I said in my first answer relating to the community agreement party. We came through the POA system, which I have been a part of for years, which means that we were vetted through there. We've submitted our applications. We are part of a system that seeks to guarantee that every section of town will have equal representation to trustees. And that was solidified by the community agreement. And that was solidified by the procedure that trustees went through when they came through the POAs. The difference now is, while I came through a civic group made up of many volunteers from our neighborhood, the other slate came through a political party that's controlled by very few people. And some people may say it's controlled by one person. They are specifically a 527 IRC political party, which is intended and created to disrupt the processes that may be in place. And in this case, the processes that are in place in our village for the election of trustees. What they have done then by creating this party is create a true campaign, a true fight that you see on more local levels and national levels, us against them. And as a result of that dynamic, we are now in a situation where the top 4 vote getters will become trustees. And that means there's no guarantee that we continue in place what has existed for over 100 years now, which is equal representation throughout the 4 sections. So that's a critical difference that everybody has to understand. If you want to put that in place, not only if you have everybody on the board from FABGC, you have everyone coming from that one political party, as opposed to the system that's been in place and that has worked for 100 years. So those are critical differences.
Thank you, Mike. We have another question came in about, Mike touched upon a little bit. It was about speak to the transparency or lack of transparency of the FABGC governance process to select candidates, whatever we know about it. And also about, more recently, as far as how the new village committees were selected. I know they changed the process and how committees are selected for the village. And what are your thoughts on that? So we'll go to Tracy on that one.
Want me to jump in? So when we talk about, how the committees are formed, I think that's something that's been of some concern to all of us in that previously there was always kind of resident community input, right, through the POA system. As committees were formed, we actually had contributors of resident communication through the POAs on who would be appropriate choices. As it exists today, it's actually unilaterally decided now by our mayor. So, that's concerning because we want to have that diversity of thought process and experience. We want to have from different residents from different sections. And so whenever we have somebody who's unilaterally making a decision that's for the betterment of our town, it becomes concerning because it sounds agenda driven, or, we don't want all like-minded people sitting in one space making a decision, because how do we get the best decisions, right? Diversity of thought creates better decision-making processes, especially when you're open to hearing all sides. So I think that that's something that is definitely concerning. And I forgot the first part of the question.
It was about, a little bit of a comparison between the way the CAP party selected their candidates, the 3 of you, versus how the FABGC selected the four other candidates, and how would you contrast them based on what you know?
Right. So in terms of our how we become candidates for this position. Right. So traditionally the POAs actually have 10 to 15 residents that sit as a nominating committee. So when they sit, it's 10 to 15 volunteers, all from different ideologies, thought processes. That people who are interested submit an application, and then you go and you sit in front of the committee and you are interviewed. So there's some tough questions that they ask, and they interview all interested parties. And then they sit down and they go through, right? And I know from sitting on the nominating committee that you take notes and you go through and you talk about each candidate and their pros and their cons, and where you think that, they can be a benefit to how the community moves forward. And then it's voted on. So again, it's a diversity of thought and process. It's resident input, and it's really an open forum in terms of the people that step up and decide to be on the nominating committee. Conversely, when we look at For a Better Garden City or FABGC right now, it concerns me that it's really kind of one thought process and one ideology. So we're not getting the diversity of candidates because everybody is kind of marching to the same beat. And so, there's that idea that we lose something when we start having just one person's direction or one kind of thought process directing how we move forward as a community.
And Tracy, I'll jump in too, because we have done over the years revisions for the POA nominating processes. So I could talk to, a couple of them over the past several years that we have implemented. One of the ones that we changed this year was, instead of having individual interviews with candidates through the nominating committee, we in the East, and Mike, I think you did it in the States too, right? Was that we decided to open up what I'll call the interview, but really make it more of a town hall. So we opened that process up. So any interested party who wanted to run for trustee was then invited to this town hall of residents from the East, and took every question that any resident had there about your views, your experience, why you're running, anything like that. But it was open to everybody. And we had, I don't know, probably 30 people there, maybe more. when we had that meeting. It was great experience for me, I'll say, and I think we had a really great conversation. So, again, as I say, as our processes to nominate candidates always evolves, it continued to evolve this year to really open up that discussion and really put people on the spot a little bit to talk about why they should be a trustee and answer some public questions on that. I thought it worked really well. I was really happy with it.
And just 2 sentences, sorry, we did do that in the estates as well. And there were questions last year around the election time about the process. And since then, there's been a concerted effort within my POA, I'm sure yours as well, to make it more transparent, to make it more accessible to the residents. And that's why we did that open town hall where the candidates came forward and the residents got to ask them questions. And that was before the interviews, where then you could consider that as a nominating committee member. What were the residents concerned with? So I think that we've really begun to evolve, especially since more and more people have asked questions about the POAs, what they're all about, and what the process is. So we continue to evolve, and I think we've shown that we are about transparency.
And
Thank
by
you
the
very
way, I'm sorry, just jump in. The way in which our nominating process works is written down. It is published on our website. It has been there for approval. If we change it, then the POA as an organ, or the Eastern POA as an organization votes on what changes are and discusses it. It's very clear. It is not kind of somebody's posting somewhere about what might have happened when. So that we really share with residents, so everybody's aware of what we do.
Judy, this is Ed. I'm going to stick with you for this next question, and it's about the safety of our drinking water. Lots of press over the last 3 or 4 months with regard to lead and other related issues, 1,4-dioxane, et cetera. What are your thoughts on where we are in that issue, and what would you like to see done in the future?
Sure. So a few things that I think are important to remember. On the 1,4-dioxane, I know that we as a village did under the, I'll call it the old board, the previous board, did a considerable amount of work in remediating that issue. And I think we're probably ahead of most villages in terms of how we were able to address that issue. It is not finished. There is more work to be done, and people could read about that in the different water reports. But I think that was an example of moving forward and moving quickly that was really helpful to the village. The lead issue is one that has come up recently. I do think that the village has tried to respond to that in a way that is helpful to people. We did spend some time last weekend in the Mott section and just knocked on doors, right, to talk to people about, kind of what's your experience, because that's where a lot of the conversation is coming from. The feedback we got from residents was, while they appreciate understanding how to get their lead tested, they still feel a little bit alone in this. And, beyond getting a reading, what do they do next? And, while there is guidance that's coming out, et cetera, I still think there's more we could do for residents around the lead issue. But I think there's a bigger issue that we have to be really careful about with something like a water resource. And that is, we can't address it in a singular fashion. We can't say, oh, this week, we have to do I-4-dioxane, and then next month we have to do lead. There needs to be an overall approach, because we all know in a year from now, there's going to be another water issue, or there's going to be another change in regulation that we have to address. And so we can't wait for these things to happen. We need to manage this resource much, much more proactively and strategically than we are now. And we have said over and over again, I believe one of the pieces, it is not the only piece by any means, is there's a gap, right, in staffing and support to really manage the water resources. So we don't have a head of DPW under which water falls, and we don't have a water commissioner. There is an active search right now to get someone in DPW with some water background. My understanding is that unfortunately they had made an offer to someone and it didn't go through. So we're back to square one, which means that now we won't have a water commissioner potentially for several months. If it were up to me, and I believe, I'm not positive that the water commissioner is a civil service role, I would really start looking for that one in parallel with the DPW person. I think this is a really critical issue, and this this linear approach to problem solving with an issue that's so important is one that we can't afford.